Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll profile Charles Lindbergh's father. But first, our guest joining us now is Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at NDSU, Dr. Carol Archbold. Dr. Archbold, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background, where you're originally from.
I was born and raised in Devils Lake, North Dakota. After high school graduation, I moved to Grand Forks and went to school at the University of North Dakota. I majored in sociology. After I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I went on for my master's degree in sociology at UND as well. After I graduated with my master's, I took a year off before I started my doctoral program. During that year, I was a adjunct professor for 1 year at, I guess they called it Moorhead State University. Now it's MSUM Moorhead or something like that. And so I worked there for 1 year, filled in for a sabbatical, one of the professors. And then I took off to Omaha, Nebraska, where I went through my doctoral work. And then after I got done with my doctoral work, I moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was offered a position there at Marquette University, and I was there for 4 years. We loved Milwaukee, we loved the city, everything it had to offer. However, we both missed home. My husband's also from Fargo, and so this opportunity at NDSU came up where they needed someone who was a specialist in law enforcement, and that happened to be my area. So I applied, and 8 years later, here I am.
Okay. Well, with that said, talk about the courses you teach at NDSU and the role you play in the department there.
Okay. I am an associate professor. I teach 2 classes a semester, a combination of both undergraduate and graduate classes. I teach Intro to Policing at the undergrad level. I teach women and minorities in the criminal justice system at the undergrad level, and I also teach research methods at the undergrad level. At the graduate level, I teach criminal justice policy. I also teach advanced research methods and then all of the graduate level policing classes. I also serve as the graduate coordinator for our graduate programs. I handle all of the issues or responsibilities that come with our grad program.
Okay. Well, now we're here to talk about a study that's recently been published that you led, and research of the impact of the oil boom in western North Dakota and as it applies to sort of policing and crime in the oil boom areas. How did the study come about? Obviously, with your background, it's an obvious answer, but how did you decide you were going to go after this one?
Well, I had heard a lot on the news media about what was going on out there, and I wasn't, I'm a researcher, so I wasn't completely convinced. I wanted to see for myself. And so because I have such a strong interest in the criminal justice system and the police, it seemed like it was a logical fit for me to do this study. As I started to do some research to look at what had been done in the past in regard to research on the topic, I was surprised to find that there were only 3 articles published on this topic. And one of them was basically a magazine article. It was not an empirical study. And so I was surprised that this was the case, that there really hadn't been much done on this with research-wise. And so I decided that that gave me even more of a reason to pursue the study.
Now, did you do this alone, or did you have others help you with this?
Part of my job, working with graduate students, that's part of my role as a professor. I included 2 of my doctoral students, Thorvald or Todd Dolly, and also Rachel Jordan. They're both doctoral students. They both happen to have past policing experience, and so I thought that they would enjoy that, and they'd feel like they were in their element. So they helped me conduct these studies, or the interviews for the study.
Mm-hmm. Talk about who all you interviewed for the study, and I guess what police and sheriff's departments.
Sure. We conducted 101 studies with sheriff's deputies and police officers from 8 different agencies across 4 counties in the Bakken region. The agencies included Williston, Watford City, Tioga, Minot, Williams County. Oh my gosh, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah.
Williams County, McKenzie County, and Dunn County.
Well, very good. You did get it. We got it worked out. You talk in the study about anecdotal evidence that you mentioned from media reports and citizens about the rampant crime out west. What do you actually mean by this, and what did you find in your research is actually going on?
Well, there isn't rampant crime out there. I think that the media gives the impression that there's a lot more going on out there in regard to violent crime than there actually is. What I found in my study is that there was a significant increase in the calls for service. The calls for service are any time a citizen calls in for police service, it's counted as a call for service. I can tell you that a large majority of those calls for service are not crime related. And so oftentimes when the media talks about calls for service and there being an increase in crime, it's presented in a way to where it's very confusing to the average viewer or reader. And so I think that's where the misconception comes in, because people are mistaking calls for service for crime.
Well, for me, obviously they're talking about the influx of the population. Wouldn't there be an influx of calls of service?
Sure, and that's the direct result of that. And there's been, I believe, a report that was published by Wayne Stenjum this summer was highlighting the changes in crime. And he had mentioned in his report that the crime has increased in western North Dakota, but not to the point to where people believe that it's at in regard to violent crimes. A lot of the crimes that have been increasing would include things like DUI, property-related crimes, disorderly conduct, things that are more minor in nature.
Okay. Well, I understand you found in your study that the way police officers, how do I say it? The way officers police these towns has changed from the way maybe small towns are used to. What do you mean? What did you find there?
Well, I think that one of the significant characteristics of small town policing all across the country is that they expect informal interactions with the police. Generally, they'll know the officer's first name and the officer will know their name. They know each other because they go to church together, their kids go to school together. It's very much a personal type of interaction. Because there's such an increase in new people coming into the area, it results in the police interacting with people that they're not familiar with. So a combination of the increase in calls for service that involve people that they're not familiar with has led some of them to take on an approach that's very different from the small town policing. Now they're using more of an urban approach where it's mostly reactive. It's very impersonal and it's more formal than it was in the past.
And of course, if you grew up in a small town with one style, that's a big change.
Absolutely, and I think that also contributes then to the citizens' perception that there's a lot of changes going on in their community.
Okay. Is short staffing one of the biggest problems you find among the police departments?
That was the biggest problem. And I know that the state is taking steps to do things to help the law enforcement agencies out west, and I think that's fantastic. However, one area that they have not provided extra resources in would be extra staffing, and I think that that's what they need the most.
What did you find in your police interviews about how they interact with new sort of the out-of-state oil workers?
Well, a lot of the officers reported that they were very cautious, much more aware of their surroundings and much more cautious in approaching people that they were unfamiliar with, and they would usually know that they didn't know the people because of the out-of-state plates. And so, during a routine traffic stop where they would have been maybe not as concerned in the past, they find themselves more on guard.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a little while ago about the increases, but can you talk about, go through these again, because you talked about the DUIs, drugs, prostitution, domestic violence, fights and disorderly conduct. Where are the big increases coming from in the crime out there?
Property-related crimes would be the most, and the second would be driving under the influence. Alcohol causes a lot of problems out there with DUI, and also the source of the disorderly conducts come from the bar brawls that take place. And so those would be the two big ones that I think we've seen a spike in the numbers, the actual official statistics.
Mm-hmm. And what are officers asking for in terms of help for them to do their jobs and more efficiently, I guess?
They need more help.
So is it just more help, more equipment? Well, yeah. What?
That was a very common, probably the most common response when I asked them what they could use to help them do their job better or more efficiently. Some officers also talked about getting new equipment, which is important. The radios that they had were dated, and if you cannot communicate with dispatch or other officers, the issue of officer safety comes up then. And so I think that it's really important to sort of look at those issues, because between the equipment and the extra people, that really is the crux of what police officers, that's what they do. They need the communication, and they need other people for support and backup.
Okay. Well, the focus of your study was obviously with police officers. What about local citizens? Did you work with them or interview them at all?
I did not. The focus of this study is specifically on the police. However, this last summer, I wrote a grant for the National Institute of Justice. I partnered with the International Association of Chiefs of Police out of Washington, D.C. We applied for a large grant, and the grant is to focus on changes in the community, specifically looking at domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. And part of our grant application was focusing on talking with citizens in the community, both people who are long-term residents and also new residents.
Okay. You mentioned about officers being maybe a little more fearful in approaching vehicles and things now. But can you talk about the fact that these officers are some of them, I guess, are fresh out of the academy and not much experience?
Right. Out of all the officers we interviewed, 55% had 36 months or less of experience. And so if you look at that overall with these agencies, that's a very large portion of the agencies having very limited experience. And so I was very surprised by that. A large majority of the officers who are new come from Minnesota. Minnesota is having some issues with funding for law enforcement, and so I guess the easiest place to get a job would be Western North Dakota, because they need the help. And so we've seen an increase in Minnesota officers coming over to Western North Dakota.
Mm-hmm. Did you examine, or do you have thoughts on how this might be clogging up the criminal justice system or the courts in those areas?
Well, just based on some of the information I gleaned from the interviews, the officers mentioned how the court system is definitely clogged. That would be an appropriate word. And also with the sheriff's department, they run the jails, and they talk about how the jails are very full all the time. And so they're dealing with an awful lot. Because the police are the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system, they really control the workload for the rest of the system. And so if the officers are seeing an increase in calls for service, not that they're all crimes, but an increase in calls for service, that means that the rest of the system, the courts and the correctional facilities, will also feel those effects of that increase.
Okay, and obviously when somebody goes to court, a lot of times the officer has to be in court too, to testify, so it's taking away from them being out on the streets.
And they're already short-staffed, and so that further exacerbates the issue of needing more people or being short-staffed.
Well, in addition to, I guess, needing more help, what did you find out about for communities in retention of police officers? Are they able to keep them on board?
Well, the officers that I interviewed, all of the agencies said that they had difficulty with retention. They had difficulty because the oil fields often offer salaries that are much higher than what they're being paid, and the cost of living is also very high in these communities. And so a lot of the officers are leaving the area because they want to find a place that is more the cost of living is lower, it's more reasonable.
Yeah, so you said, while the oil boom is good for North Dakota, I know we've talked about it on other shows about, service industry is hard to keep people, but so you found that in police and sheriff departments, hard to keep the pay where it would keep them involved. What's been the reaction to your study since you finished it and published it?
Well, I've had a lot of very positive feedback from anybody who's read the report. And what's interesting about it is the officers from these agencies that I interviewed, I sent a copy of the report back to each of the agencies so they could see exactly what I compiled. And I believe that the report is a direct reflection of what they told me, what they need, what's going on in their communities. And so overall, it has been very positive. My hope is that I can continue to do research out there. There's a lot more that needs to be done beyond looking at just policing. as you mentioned, with the criminal justice system, there's a lot of backup with the processing of cases. And so that would be another next step to look at out in Western North Dakota.
I believe you talked about some numbers, 8 agencies, 101 interviews maybe, is that what
Right.
that was?
Yep.
What was the length that it took you to do all this?
We started the interviews in October of 2012, and those went through March of 2013. After I got done with all of the interviews, it took time to transcribe the interview notes, and then of course to analyze and write up the report. And so the report was published at the end of August of this year.
So over an 8-month period, you did all these interviews. Did you see any changes or anything through the time frame, or was it pretty much the same throughout?
In regard to the landscape, it was the same.
Yeah.
I was very surprised on the first trip out there to see how the landscape had changed with the oil rigs, kind of interrupting, I guess, the rolling prairie. And it also is definitely traffic logged or jammed. There's a lot more trucks, big trucks on these roads that are not built for that type of traffic.
Okay. One of the things you talked about a couple of times, the increased numbers of calls and how much it's jumped. And then, but you made the point, and it kind of just want to re-emphasize it, I guess, that these calls don't actually result in a crime
Right.
or charges being filed, but it requires police activity.
Yeah, they have to respond. And that's why we have the 911 and dispatch system set up, because then that way if citizens feel they need the service, they'll call. They know where to call. The problem is, and some of the officers talked about this, that the citizens would call in, they're more quickly to call about things that do not seem to be right to them. A lot of suspicious person calls, and that makes sense in a small town where you know everyone, and suddenly you have a lot of people who you do not know. And so the number of suspicious person calls has skyrocketed.
Okay. Do you think anything is going to be done in response to your study? Is it going to, make it easier for police departments, or what do you hope will be done with this?
Well, I hope that something is done. My biggest, I guess, goal for this study is to look at what the needs are of those law enforcement agencies, and clearly the biggest need that I found was an increase in personnel. They need more people. And so my hope is that there will be some monies available that will be allocated to those different agencies so that they can increase the number of people working there. That will help them out in regard to the stress that's already placed on the people who are working there short-staffed.
Okay. And finally, if people want more information about your study or the criminal justice program at NDSU, where's the best place to go? Who can they contact?
Well, if you go onto the NDSU website, it's www.ndsu.edu, and you go to the criminal justice webpage, there's a link on there that goes to the faculty and has all of our bios, and there's a copy of the report right there linked into that page. You can find more information there.
Okay, so you can actually see the report.
Yeah, you can download it and print it out.
Well, that's great. Dr. Archibald, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Stay tuned for more. When you hear the name Charles Lindbergh, most people think of the famous aviator. But at the turn of the century, it was his father that made the headlines. Charles Lindbergh Sr. was a respected U.S. congressman, but his alliance with the Nonpartisan League made him the target of anti-progressive forces during the 1918 Republican primary.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun.
In the spring of 1918, the Nonpartisan League and an accompanying Workers' Nonpartisan League, which had been organized in Minnesota, chose to run Charles A. Lindbergh, the father of the famous flyer, for governor. Lindbergh was a Republican. He'd served in Congress for a number of years from Minnesota as a Republican. But he opposed, very publicly and very strongly opposed, American entry into World War I. He blamed it on, quote, the money trust. He invented that term and wrote a book with that title. And he was not exactly loved by the large banks of the country or by the banks in Minneapolis.
And the time has come when every citizen must declare himself American or traitor.
He did, in 1918, undertake that at a time when it took a great deal of personal courage to challenge the hysteria against anti-war people that had been built up in Minnesota. The patriotism hysteria, the fear of immigrants and of what were known as hyphenated Americans, like German-American. And with considerable courage, he undertook that primary election and campaigned in the state. But Lindbergh won the hearts of the nonpartisan League farmers and the union laborers of Minnesota in that campaign, and for good reason.
There was a tremendous amount of action taken against the Nonpartisan League during that campaign. Lindbergh not only was arrested, but he gave a speech, and when he came out of the speech, they had beaten up his driver, and they shot at them. And they left town, and Lindbergh said, you know, don't drive too fast, they'll think we're scared.
The Minnesota legislature, under the Republican Party, created the Commission of Public Safety, which was a strange act. It created this commission that had dictatorial powers in Minnesota. No foreign-born person could teach school in the state. The German language was not actually outlawed, but it was very much frowned upon. The town of New Ulm had a town meeting to discuss the new draft law and to question the constitutionality of drafting young men and sending them overseas to fight. That had never been done before in the United States. By the very fact that they questioned the draft and questioned the constitutionality of it, the governor, quite illegally, removed the mayor and all of the elected officers. Anyone who had had anything to do with organizing the meeting. Newspapers all over the state railed against the traitors in New Ulm. The Commission of Public Safety was a very dark time, dark spot on Minnesota's history. Civil liberties practically vanished in the state. That brought a large element of people who were normally very conservative, Republican-leaning voters over to the Nonpartisan League because the very bitterness of being persecuted illegally in that way.
So the climate was rather tense, but became more tense as time went on. The Public Safety Commission, which had the authority to do things necessary and proper to protect the public safety, was very shortly interpreted to mean try to stop dissent, because they were afraid of losing their political power because they had heard that the Nonpartisan League was starting to organize, and that was a threat to them. They created something called the Home Guard, which were these sort of local vigilante types. They also worked in conjunction with sheriffs and other local officials. So when the Nonpartisan League started organizing, they were sort of spying on them. And then when the campaign got in higher gear in the spring of 1918, all kinds of trouble took place.
That was a very fierce and pretty awful election. A number of counties would not allow Lindbergh to speak within the county. They had already forbidden Nonpartisan League organizers to enter the county. There were a number of instances of mob violence. There was shooting at Lindbergh. There were threats on his life, hanging in effigy. It was a very ugly time. It took a lot of courage to campaign around the state of Minnesota, but he apparently had it. He just quietly went his way and campaigned. In the end, he was defeated by Governor Burnquist, who was an incumbent Republican governor. So it was a decisive defeat. He did not run for public office again. He became one of the organizers of the Farmer Labor Party, but his health began to fail, and he died early in the 1920s, so he didn't live to see the success of the Farmer Labor Party.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.